The key had been sitting on my kitchen counter for 11 years. Brass, heavy, monogrammed with the letter S on a worn leather tab that my grandmother had stitched by hand sometime in the 1980s. I had never used it, never needed to, but I had carried it from apartment to apartment, city to city, the way you carry something you cannot explain and cannot throw away. I did not know that Thursday night in October, that by morning that key would be the only thing I owned that mattered. Welcome back to her secret diary. I am so glad you're here for this one, because what this family buried underneath 30 years of Sunday dinners and beach vacations will leave you completely speechless. If this channel has ever given you something to hold on to on a quiet evening, take just 2 seconds right now and subscribe. It means more than I can say. Now let me take you back to where this started. My name is Audrey Sinclair. I had spent 12 years building something real, a senior marketing director position at a coastal hospitality firm in Savannah, Georgia, the kind of job that made my father finally stop asking when I was going to do something serious with my life. I had an apartment on Jones Street with tall windows and a gas fireplace. I had a savings account that made me feel, for the first time, like the ground beneath my feet was solid. I lost all of it on a Wednesday. The firm dissolved without warning. No severance. No transition period. Just a calendar invitation titled Important Company Update that ended with a HR email and a deactivated badge. I sat in the parking garage for 40 minutes before I could make myself drive. I called my mother, Carolyn Sinclair, from the car. She answered on the second ring, her voice already carrying that particular careful brightness she used when she was managing her reaction to something. I told her what happened. There was a pause that lasted slightly too long. "Come home," she said. "Come, have dinner. We will figure this out." My parents lived 20 minutes from me in a house in Ardsley Park, the same brick colonial I had grown up in. I had eaten at that kitchen table 10,000 times. I knew which step on the back porch creaked and which burner on the stove ran too hot. I thought I knew what coming home meant. My father, Gerald Sinclair, was standing at the counter when I walked in. He did not hug me. He was holding a mug of coffee he never drank, and he kept his eyes on the window above the sink for most of dinner. My younger brother, Miles Sinclair, sat across from me and smiled in that loose, careful way he had when he already knew something I did not. Dinner was quiet. Nobody asked about the job. Afterward, my mother cleared the plates, and my father set down his untouched coffee and said, very calmly, that they needed to talk to me about the house. I assumed he meant their house, the brick colonial. Some repair, some refinancing, something practical. He did not mean their house. He meant the beach house on Tybee Island, the one our family had used every summer for as long as I could remember, the weathered gray cottage 2 blocks from the water that I had assumed belonged to my father's oldest friend, a man none of us had seen in 15 years. My father slid a document across the kitchen table. I looked down at it. Then I looked up at him. My name was on the deed. Not his name. Not my mother's. Mine. Audrey Marie Sinclair. Dated, not recently. Dated the year I turned 7 years old. "We need you to sign it over," my father said. His voice was completely steady. "Tonight." I looked at my mother. She was looking at the window. I looked at my brother, Miles. He was looking at his hands. And then my father said the thing that I have never been able to unhear. "You were never supposed to know it existed." I did not sign anything that night. I folded the deed, put it in my bag, and told my father I needed to think. He looked at my mother. My mother looked at the window. Miles looked at nothing at all. I drove back to my apartment on Jones Street and sat at my kitchen table with the brass key in my hand until 2 in the morning. 12 years in marketing had taught me one thing above everything else. When someone needs a decision made tonight, they are afraid of what you will find out tomorrow. I started with the deed. The property address was listed as 4 Pelican Row, Tybee Island, Georgia. The transfer date was March 14th, the year I turned 7. The grantor line listed a name I did not recognize. Warren T. Calloway. Not my father's friend. Not anyone from my family circle that I had ever heard mentioned. A complete stranger had transferred a beach house into my name when I was in second grade. I searched Warren T. Calloway until midnight. What I found felt, at first, like an answer. He had been a real estate attorney in Savannah. Retired. Deceased. Passed away 9 years ago. His firm had handled estate transfers, property law, coastal holdings. It was easy to construct a story from that. My grandmother's estate, maybe. A family asset that got routed through a lawyer and landed in my name for tax reasons. Something my parents were now trying to quietly reclaim. I almost convinced myself that was all it was. Then I found the photograph. It was not online. It was in a box in my closet. A box of things from my grandmother's house that I had packed after her funeral and never fully unpacked. A photograph, slightly water damaged at one corner, showing my mother standing in front of the gray beach cottage on Tybee Island. She was young in it. Younger than I had ever known her. She was laughing. Standing beside her was a man I did not recognize. He was not my father. On the back of the photograph, in my grandmother's handwriting, Caroline and Warren. Summer 1987. I set the photograph on the kitchen table next to the brass key and did not move for a long time. Warren T. Calloway had not been a stranger. He had known my mother, known her well enough to appear in a photograph my grandmother had kept for decades, known her before my parents were married, known her before I was born. I thought about the deed again. The transfer date. March 14th. I pulled up my own birth certificate on my phone, a digital copy I had stored years ago during a lease application. I was born November 3rd. March 14th, the year I turned 7, meant the deed was signed 7 years and 4 months after my birth. That ruled out any pre-birth arrangement. Warren Calloway had transferred that property into my name when I was already a child old enough to remember things. Old enough that someone would have had to make a deliberate decision to keep it from me. I called my father's oldest friend the next morning, a man named Douglas, who had known my parents since before their wedding. I told him I was going through some family paperwork and asked if he had ever heard of Warren Calloway. The pause that followed lasted 4 full seconds. "Where'd you hear that name?" he said. I told him I had found some documents. Another pause. Then, very quietly, "Audrey, your mother is going to be very upset that this is coming up." Not surprised, not confused, upset. As if this were a wound that had already healed once, and I was reopening it without permission. I thanked him and ended the call. I looked at the brass key on my table, the monogrammed S on the leather tab. I had always assumed S was for Sinclair. I turned the tab over for the first time in 11 years. The other side had been initialed in faded ink. W.C. My mother texted me on Friday morning at 7:43. "Just checking on you. Dinner Sunday? Dad made your favorite." I set my phone face down on the counter and looked at the photograph of her and Warren Calloway for a long time. The coffee I had poured sat untouched until it went cold. 12 years of building campaigns had trained me to recognize a particular kind of message. The kind designed to feel casual. The kind sent at a specific time, on a specific day, after a specific event. My mother did not text before 8 in the morning. She never had. I did not respond. Instead, I drove to Tybee Island. The beach house at 4 Pelican Row was gray and weathered the way coastal houses get when salt air has had decades to work on them. I had been here every summer of my childhood and somehow never once wondered who paid the property taxes, who arranged the maintenance, who held the deed. I had a key. I stood on the porch for a moment before I put the brass key in the lock. The monogram faced up. The double C on the reverse side caught the morning light. The key turned. The house smelled like cedar and old linen and something faintly floral that I could not immediately place. Inside, the furniture was simple and unchanged. The same blue couch, the same round kitchen table, the same framed watercolor of the marsh above the fireplace. But the bookshelf beside the window had a gap in it. A visible gap. The kind left when something has been recently removed. Dust outlined a rectangle where a book or a box had sat for years. Something had been taken from this house recently. Before I arrived, I checked every drawer in the kitchen. Most were empty. In the last one, pushed to the back, I found a utility bill. The account holder was not my name, despite what the deed said. The account was registered to a property management company, Callaway Coastal Holdings, LLC, Warren Callaway's company, still active, still billing, still managing this house 9 years after the man himself had died. I photographed the bill and kept moving. The second bedroom held a closet with a high shelf I needed a chair to reach. Behind 2 folded blankets, I found a shoebox. Inside the shoebox were letters, handwritten, bundled with a rubber band that crumbled when I touched it. The return address on every envelope was the same, Savannah Street. The name above the address was Warren T. Callaway. Every letter was addressed to my mother. Her maiden name, before she was a Sinclair. I did not read them then. I put them in my bag. On the drive back, my brother Miles called. I answered, because not answering would tell him something. "Mom says you haven't called her back," he said. "I've been busy. She's worried about you, Audrey. Losing the job. All this stress." He paused in that way people pause when they are reading from a mental script. "She thinks you should come home for a few days. Clear your head." "I'm fine, Miles. She just doesn't want you making decisions from an emotional place right now." I almost laughed. Making decisions. As if I were the one who had put a property deed on a kitchen table and asked a woman who had just lost her job to sign something tonight. "I'll call her soon," I said, and hung up. That evening, I read 3 of the letters. They were careful, formal in the way people wrote, when they assumed letters could be read by others. But in the third one, dated 4 months before my parents' wedding, Warren Callaway wrote a single sentence that made me sit completely still. He wrote, "Whatever happens after Saturday, the house belongs to the child. Not to my mother. Not to the family. To the child." I was not born yet when that letter was written. I looked at the brass key in my hand, at the worn leather tab, at my grandmother's careful stitching on the front. She had known. My grandmother had known about this before I was born, and she had made sure I would never lose the key. I spent the weekend building a timeline. Not from memory. From evidence. 12 years of marketing had taught me that feelings are easy to dismiss, and documents are not. I laid everything across my kitchen table. The deed, the utility bill, the photograph, the 3 letters, and I worked the way I had always worked. Quietly. Methodically. From the outside in. The timeline began in 1987. My mother and Warren Callaway photographed together at the beach house. My grandmother kept the photograph. That meant she approved, or at minimum, she knew. My parents married in the spring of 1989. Warren's last letter to my mother was dated 4 months before the wedding. "Whatever happens after Saturday, the house belongs to the child." At the time of that letter, there was no child. My mother was not yet pregnant. I was born in November of 1989, 7 months after the wedding. I sat with that for a long time. The coffee beside me went completely cold. I called the county property records office on Monday morning. I gave them the address at 4 Pelican Row and asked for the full transfer history. The clerk put me on hold for 6 minutes. When she came back, she read me 2 transactions. The first was a transfer into my name in March of the year I turned 7. The second was an attempted transfer out of my name, filed by a Gerald Sinclair, that had been rejected. The rejection reason: the property owner was a minor, and no guardian ad litem had been appointed to authorize the transfer. My father had tried to take the house when I was 7. He had failed because I was too young to sign, and no court had given him the legal authority to sign for me. I understood now why my grandmother had held the key. My phone lit up with a text from my mother. "Just a thinking of you. No question. No invitation." The kind of message sent to create the appearance of warmth without risking a conversation. I set the phone down without responding and looked at the brass key on the table. The S on the front. Sinclair, the name I had grown up with. The WC on the back, the name that had transferred this house into my name before my father could claim it, before anyone could claim it except me. Warren Calloway had not given the house to my mother. He had skipped a generation deliberately. He had put it in the name of a 7-year-old child, specifically because a 7-year-old child could not be pressured into signing anything. He had known my father would try. On Wednesday, my mother called instead of texting. I answered. "We should talk in person," she said. Her voice was careful in a way that told me someone was listening. "Your father has some paperwork he wants to go over with you. Just logistics. It would be easier face to face." "Sure," I said. "I'll come Thursday evening." The relief in her voice was immediate and genuine, and told me everything I needed to know about what they believed was happening. I arrived at the house in Ardsley Park at 6. My father was already sitting at the kitchen table with a folder in front of him. The same table. The same untouched mug of coffee to his left. The same window he stared at when he was avoiding something. He opened the folder and slid a new document toward me. A quitclaim deed. My name at the top, a signature line at the bottom, a notary block already filled in. "It's just a formality," he said, cleaning up old paperwork. My mother stood at the counter with her back partially turned. I looked at the document, then I reached into my bag and set Warren Calloway's third letter on the table between us. I watched my father's face. He did not look surprised. He looked at my mother. She turned from the counter very slowly, and then my phone buzzed on the table. A number I did not recognize, a voicemail, left 6 minutes before I walked in the door. The preview text showed the first 4 words of the transcription. "My name is Douglas." I listened to the voicemail in the car afterward. Douglas spoke slowly, the way older men speak when they have decided to finally stop carrying something. He said he had known my mother since before her first wedding. Before my father. He said Warren Calloway had loved her quietly for years and had asked nothing in return except one thing. That if she ever had a child, that child would have something that could not be taken. Something permanent. Something no new husband, no new family, no new last name could reach. He said my mother had agreed. He said my grandmother had witnessed the arrangement personally. He said my father had found out when I was 7 and had spent the next 27 years trying to fix what he saw as a mistake that predated him. He said he was sorry it had taken him this long. I sat in the driveway of my parents' house in Ardsley Park until the streetlights came on. Then I drove home. I did not go back inside. I did not need to. The deed was already in my name, had been in my name for 27 years. My father's attempted transfer had been rejected when I was 7, and he had never found another legal path. The property management company, Calloway Coastal Holdings, had been maintained by Warren's estate attorney, with instructions to continue until I either claimed the property or turned 40, at which point it would transfer to a preservation trust in my name automatically. Warren Calloway had built something my father could not dismantle. He had simply needed me to find it, before my father convinced me to give it away. The last piece arrived 2 weeks later. A letter from Warren's estate attorney, forwarded through Douglas. Inside was a short handwritten note on Warren's personal stationery, dated 9 years ago, written in the last months of his life. He wrote, "I never asked to be her father. I only asked that she never have to wonder if she was worth protecting." I read it 3 times. Then I set it beside the brass key on my kitchen table and made coffee that I actually drank while it was still warm. I did not speak to my parents for a long time after that. Not out of anger. There simply wasn't a conversation available that any of us were ready to have. My mother sent careful texts that I answered briefly. My father did not reach out at all. Miles called once and talked about the weather for 4 minutes before saying goodbye. The silence settled over everything the way snow does. Quietly. Without asking permission. I drove to Tybee Island on a Saturday in December. The beach house at 4 Pelican Row looked the same in winter as it always had, gray and steady and unbothered by weather. I unlocked the door with the brass key. The cedar and linen smell was still there. I opened every curtain. Sunlight moved across the blue couch and the round kitchen table and the watercolor of the marsh above the fireplace. The gap on the bookshelf was still there. I did not know yet what had been removed or whether it would ever be returned. But the house itself was complete. The house had always been complete. I made tea in the small kitchen and sat at the round table facing the window. Outside, the water was flat and silver and completely still. A pelican moved across the line, where the sky met the marsh and disappeared without effort. I thought about what my grandmother had stitched into a worn leather tab and kept safe for decades. I thought about a man who had loved quietly from a distance and left something permanent behind. I thought about what it means to protect someone without ever letting them know they needed protection. The brass key sat on the table in the sunlight. The S on the front. The WC on the back. Both of them mine now. Fully and finally mine. They thought they could take everything from me. In the end, the truth changed everything for all of us. Now I sit here at this table looking at that old brass key, catching the winter light and wondering something. If your own family crossed a line they could never uncross, would you have done what I did? Or would you have walked away? Tell me honestly in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Her Secret Diary for more unspoken family truths.